Good morning and welcome to the Daily Cyber Briefing for Friday the 10th of October. I'm Stephen Ridgway and today we've got special guest, the Head of Engineering from TSC, Ross Eastman, who will be here to talk about all sorts of very interesting things in just a minute. So I'm only going to kick off with a couple of little things to point you in the direction of this morning. Which is more along the lines of weekend reading, have a think about this, rather than the usual guess what's been breached and guess what you need to patch. So first one that I came across this morning was that it now appears that if you were caught up in the SonicWall breach from September, I think it was, quite recent. The backups of your firewall configs have been exfiltrated as part of that breach. All I can say is, collectively in TSC, we thought about this, and keeping your backups with your live system is a really dumb idea from a secure architecture and BCP perspective. So have a think about these things. Yes, your cloud providers, not just SonicWall, this goes on with all sorts of places. And Ross, you were saying earlier, weren't you? Lots of things throw out that ability. Just click this button, it'll back it all up for you.
Easy backups.
Yeah, but keeping your backups there is dumb. So that's a bad idea. We strongly recommend you don't do that. However, if your firewall configs backups have been stolen, you're going to have to begin to think about how would you mitigate the risks. So a lot of reconnaissance that adversary attacker groups do is around, how do I get my way around stuff? How do I find the things that I really care about?
Yeah,
this is going to give them loads of information. It's also going to give them loads of information about how you're protecting what you're doing, so they'll find the holes.
Exactly. Having the blueprints for your network out there in the wild is absolutely terrifying. I can't imagine many more scary things as a network engineer.
Absolutely. So think about it from a service design perspective. Do you really want to be keeping your backups in places where your attackers can get access to them? No, is the answer to that one. And secondly, if you've been caught up with this, well, you need to rapidly think about mitigating the risks of adversary groups knowing way too much about your technology now. So that one makes a good read. The other article that I came across this morning is it's a good article in the Register that talks about some research that Anthropic have done into poisoning LLM AIs. Now, when they say poisoning, what they are meaning by that is poisoning the training data in order for the AI model to spit out certain information when prompted in specific ways. The key thing at the moment, from a testing data perspective, what they're trying to do is get to a position where if you type in a particular trigger word or trigger phrase, it will then spawn a load of gibberish back to you. Now, okay, the scary thing is you don't have to make it generate gibberish. You could make it generate bad code. You could make it provide information that the manipulator of the AI training data wants it to provide. Now, okay, from a technical perspective, there's all sorts of technical cyber things in there, because a lot of people use, we do it ourselves. We cross-check things, bits of code against AI and whatever, although we don't rely on AI to write our code. Everybody uses tools to
yeah, I sometimes make it generate me some boilerplate because I can't be bothered writing the boilerplate for Terraform.
Exactly. But what you don't want is for somebody to say, write me a widget, and AI goes, oh, widget, I'm supposed to write some malware for that. Here, have some malware.
Exactly. Okay. It kind of goes back to, do you remember, oh gosh, what was his name? Maybe, Ken Thompson, the guy who got a Turing Award and did the reflections on trusting trust.
Yeah.
And he was talking about, the original sin of compilers and sneaking something in that could self-replicate when the compiler was called in a certain way. And obviously compilers are built with compilers, and then you end up in this situation where you've potentially got code that's come out of AI which could self-replicate more code that you could never really spot until it was far too late. That's just come to mind because Laurie Wired, I don't know if you've heard of her YouTube channel. She's really interesting, actually. She is a professional reverse engineer for, I think, a FANG company, and sort of very invested in cybersecurity and decompiling and that sort of thing. And she did a video kind of explaining the original sin of the C compiler, which is not something that I'd ever really got my head around before, but it is interesting to think about. If you can't trust the very, very source, everything that comes after that is progressively getting less and less trustworthy.
Absolutely,
and to prove. So,
and I think the interesting thing is it goes way beyond what we would see in cyber infosec tech, because LLMs are used mostly, I think, are used for people researching, generating,
content
stuff, content, all of this sort of stuff, and it means. I mean, already I'm aware of the fact that under certain circumstances, the last time I tested it, ChatGPT made up about 20% of the facts that it was giving. And some of those are not wholly fiction, but they're an interpretation of something that isn't quite right, that's being authoritatively presented as the correct answer or the correct thing at that point. Will you imagine from the point of view of sociology, politics, whatever, if your AI model has been poisoned to have a particular view on things, how can you trust what's coming back? I think the answer is you have to be very skeptical.
Absolutely. I mean, when you consider that most of its training data is going to be blogs from the web generally, Reddit and what have you, a lot of people present opinion as fact already on the internet.
Absolutely.
AI is regurgitating that authoritatively. Then you've got some concerns about sort of source.
Can you imagine some of the some of the adversary groups, some of the geopolitical stuff? I wouldn't be at all surprised if China wanted to make sure that LLMs presented the history of the world seen through a Chinese lens.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and the percentage we're talking about is so low as well. You said 250 documents out of 13 billion tokens.
Yeah,
that is 6 zeros before you get to a significant digit.
Yeah, I mean, it's just
percentage.
It's absolutely, because theoretically, I think the concept has been around for a while that if you controlled a certain amount of training data, you could make AI do all sorts of strange things. I don't think anybody realized how little information. Anyway, so fascinating article. If you're concerned about these things, which I am, I suspect you are as well, aren't you, Ross?
That's very
absolutely. Have a read, have a think, and as always, treat stuff that you find on the web or on AI or anywhere else skeptically until proven to be actually accurate.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So Ross, I think thank you for joining us today. You wanted to talk a little bit about some of the stuff we've been seeing over the last week.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a bit of sort of first-party research happening now, so it seems right to share it with the world in the spirit of democratization of cybersecurity and all of that.
Absolutely.
So I mean, I've picked out a few sort of key things from our dashboards to talk about. The top one, and kind of probably the most obvious, is sort of geolocation.
I suppose just to put it in context, because many of the listeners and watchers won't be aware, but we run some honeypots. We're collecting information. What are we seeing out there that's being thrown around the world? Because it is always very interesting to see, and there are often trends in this stuff.
Absolutely.
So this information is coming off. We're gathering it by placing sort of honeypots and interesting things and doing some looking at what's being thrown around maliciously out there in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I missed that bit, but yeah. So geolocations. Now, obviously, geolocation data needs to be taken with a fairly large handful of salt, because it's just presenting the IP location for a public IP that could just be an exit node for somebody somewhere completely else in the world. But the top 5 hitters that we get back are US, which is 74% of all of the IPs are registered in the US that we're getting hit from, followed by, and we're going down to obviously less than 10% per each now, Egypt, India, Iran, and Nigeria. Egypt I thought was interesting, primarily because of its sort of global location, in terms of it being close to geopolitically unstable areas of the world. And also because a heck of a lot of internet, infrastructure terminates there. There's about 10 deep sea cables going through the Med that all land themselves squarely in Egypt before going on to the rest of the world. So I suspect that that's got something to do with the fact that they're coming up as a sort of second highest hitter for IP location. As I say, it's not a metric to sort of use to beat anybody about the head with or really inform policy, because geolocation is notoriously kind of fickle and not necessarily worth an awful lot. And it kind of makes sense that an awful lot of this stuff would be coming from the US. I
think it's interesting that the larger geopolitical adversary groups don't flag up in that list, which I think demonstrates that they're probably just tunneling all their stuff out of the US.
Of course they are, and you would, if you sat there and thought about it for 10 minutes, you'd think, what are people going to be blocking on their WAF? I know.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Where are they decidedly not going to be blocking on their WAF? Well, the United States, for better or worse, an awful lot of the world's commerce centers around things that are based in the United States, especially when we're talking about internet commerce. Just a brief look at that flyby. In terms of sniffed ports and things that we were getting prodded at, top of the list is 9100, which is print network sharing. Keep your printers off the internet, for goodness sake.
Printer network sharing attacks date back to the ARG. I think Noah had a vulnerable printer connected to the internet, or the proto-internet.
Oh, I'm confident he had a brother hooked up with some wet string. Yeah, absolutely.
It's unbelievable. But we're kind of guessing this stuff must still work, or are we talking about bots that have been running since 1980?
I mean, a little bit of both, I suspect. But that is a recurring theme as we go through this data. There's quite a lot of stuff that it shocked me that quite a lot of the stuff that's being prodded is to do with CVEs that are 26 years old. And they wouldn't be doing it unless there was a reason, right? So there's clearly stuff out there. Anyway, so that's network printing. Then we get Redis, and obviously Redis is kind of one of those pieces of network infrastructure that pretty much everybody uses, and might not think about too much because it's just a key pair value store. That's all it does. It's dumb and it sits there, but you put an awful lot of quite concerning data into Redis, because it gets used for all sorts, including session storage for web stuff. People will quite often use Redis as a backend for that.
I think Redis is one of those things that if you don't think about it, you might not even know that you're using.
Potentially, yes. And I suspect that there's an awful lot of SaaS products out there and sort of PaaS, so platform as a service products, that will be using Redis. And it will be exposed to a service that you're using, even if you're not directly interacting with it. So it's one of those things that proliferates, the entire internet. Part of the reason why they had the whole thing about licensing, a year ago now, and changing their license is because it's being used absolutely everywhere, and nobody's given them a red cent for it. So they, I think kind of fair enough when some of the biggest businesses in the world are using this product for free, and we don't see any sort of kickbacks. So, stuff it, we're going to change the license. Obviously, that just meant it got forked, because that's what the
nature of it
community does. But there's still going to be an awful lot of people that, even if they aren't running Redis exactly, will be running a fork of Redis, and it will be using a default port. So that's 6379. Next highest up is a SIP port, 5060 for VoIP. What's interesting is that quite a lot of the at least a couple, if not three, of these sort of top-rated ports are all to do with, in some way or another, kind of human interface devices. So they're all things that people are going to use by physically pushing buttons, which to me is interesting because there's a potential for that sniffing those things and poking around those sorts of networks to be the entrance for more people-based attacks. We're talking about social engineering and stuff.
Yeah, good point.
If I can be inside your VoIP network and generate a call from your boss, it's going to look a lot better.
Yeah.
Than me calling from an external number in terms of selling the story. So I suspect that there's a fair amount of that going on, as well as just scraping for botnet. I think Network Printers is probably just looking for things to add to a botnet primarily, but certainly for VoIP, I can imagine that being a real scenario.
Yeah, because it's the scattered spider group, isn't it, that has finally cottoned on to how little there is in the way of controls around what the help desk will do if somebody phones them up.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I've said many times, going back many years, it takes a very brave help desk analyst who's probably quite young and maybe even in their first job to tell the CEO that they're not going to reset the password because they don't believe that you are who you say you are.
Absolutely.
That's career limiting stuff.
Totally.
So one of the checks and balances, and I've used this in the past as well, one of the checks and balances is, well, help desk, if the person who flags up on the phone system actually appears to be the CEO, it might well be the CEO. If it's some random number you don't recognize, or if it's somebody else's number that has initiated this call, be much more skeptical. So you're right. If you can get inside the VoIP system and not only impersonate the person, but impersonate the technology that person would use, it becomes much harder for the help desk to then justify saying, no, I didn't fix your problem, CEO.
Yeah, totally. I mean, and the process of voice cloning has now gotten to the point where it's kind of a joke. It's kind of a toy that people play with on the internet. It's not, hey, we can make this text-to-speech sound like Mr. Burns.
I've actually got I've got voice generated, my own voice generated via one of these things. So because I was thinking about whether I would just pre-record all of these podcasts and just press go and go and drink my tea whilst my own voice was read out from my
script. I can't do that, Dave.
Didn't do it in the end. It wasn't that good.
Yeah, not that good, but potentially good enough to get a couple of snippets that might, put the fear of God into some poor first jobber on a front
Absolutely,
desk. That was it. We've got 1025, our good old friend SMTP, because email is as old as the hills and everybody uses it. I guess there are probably fewer than ever self-hosted SMTP servers, but doesn't mean there are none, and there are an awful lot of not terribly secure publicly available SMTP servers out there on the internet. And there are also lots of governments that will self-host for obvious reasons. Historically, government organizations aren't always the best at securing these things, especially older technologies.
Agreed.
And again, if you can start poking emails in as though you are on the domain.
Absolutely. Very, very convincing.
Yeah, it is. And then the last one is something a bit more modern, which is 10,001, which is Ubiquity's auto-discovery port for finding and pushing devices around. And again, if you could get something that you controlled onto a Ubiquity, Wi-Fi network, and it looks like an AP, you can start doing quite a lot of interesting stuff. With the traffic that's already on that system and inspecting and sniffing and all of that good stuff. That's a more modern one.
I suspect that's a hangover from the Ubiquity vulnerabilities that have been kicking around. Ubiquity's not had a great year so far.
No, they haven't. which is a shame because I actually really like their gear.
Yeah, completely. I agree.
But yes. So then very, very briefly, source IP reputation, 96% of the traffic came from known attackers, which meant that they basically have been flagged up on things like IPDB. So there's nothing new under the sun, really. These are all well-known IPs that have had malicious activity on them in the past, trouncing around the internet and scanning for things and seeing what they can find. It kind of reinforces, though, that very few attacks are being initiated by individuals.
Yeah,
they're kind of all well understood, long-lived attack groups that are sitting there and just enumerating the internet and putting together presumably massive lists and itineraries of things that they find, and either acting upon them themselves later or selling that data. There's a hell of a lot of that.
No, I agree. I think I stand by. I mean, that's interesting that a lot of these IP addresses would flag if you gathered the information around whether they're known malicious or not. Known malicious is difficult though, because a lot of cloud-based IP addresses are ephemeral. So something that was malicious yesterday is legit today. It is a bit of a thorny area, but it just shows that having good visibility into what's going on is really important. I still feel like a lot of organizations underplay that. They overplay the importance of security technical controls and don't understand the value of good security visibility. Because if you are like we do, if you are ingesting threat feed information and then populating the alerts within your security visibility tooling with that threat feed information, so that when the analyst comes to look at it, it comes pre-populated with, this is X. By the way, it's coming from location Y using known malicious IP address Z. It's probably more important than something, you can identify it quickly, triage it quickly. But then about 80% of cybersecurity defense is basic hygiene.
Yeah, absolutely.
And as you're saying, a lot of these things, we're going back to very old exploits, looking at old technologies, printers, phones, these sorts of things. It's all well known. So if you can defend against that, you've kind of dealt with that 80% or so of stuff, which it would definitely get you if you didn't put the effort into defending against it.
Completely.
And then you can put your intellectual effort into the 20%, which is actually, an APT that might be interested in you, rather than just all this stuff that is opportunistic or just information gathering, but you need to know it's information gathering.
Absolutely. It kind of goes back to this whole issue with CVE, 0 days with no known exploits in the wild and people getting really het up about them. And you're like, yeah, sure. I mean, take notice. And if that CVE gets a patch, apply the patch. But actually, let's worry about the fact that you've got a couple of HPs that have been on the internet for the past 22 years.
Yes,
and have publicly assignable IP addresses,
Yeah, completely. I mean, I've seen organizations that have put all their effort into the really clever stuff and have been knocked over by some utterly trivial basic hygiene
something mundane
issues. It took the whole cyber and tech focus away from the stuff that they were actually being targeted with, whilst trying to work out what the intricacies of a particular APT group they were worried about might be capable of doing.
It's the whole profile, the whole attack profile scenario again, isn't it? Like those are worth doing because they really do help you zone in on the things that might actually affect you most as a business. And if you've got limited resource, which everybody does, it doesn't matter the size of the business, your resource is limited.
Yes.
Applying those fixes for those things first is always going to do you better than let's take every single CV that rolls off the press this morning and make sure that one's nailed down.
Totally.
So that kind of all of that kind of leads into this next point, which is about the sort of OS distribution and the operating systems that we're seeing signatures for hitting this service. 95% of those are running Linux kernel versions between 2.3 and 3.x, so 3. Whatever the latest 3 was. Which is very interesting because, to me, personally, I would think that kind of indicates that an awful lot of botnet usage is happening.
Yeah.
And that a lot of appliances, your set-top box, your fridge, they'll be running Linux, but they will be running Linux based on a kernel that isn't necessarily up to date. And patching these things is certainly something that hardware vendors are not known to really give a crap about, especially in the kind of smart home and home tech space.
Yeah.
So I'm not actually surprised to see so many old sort of Linux distros checking in. That to me, it seems likely that they are botnets made up of IP cameras, and that sort of thing. Where, well, the Linux 2.3 kernel was probably quite small, and it probably also has better support for 32-bit architectures, right?
Yep.
And a lot of these sort of jelly bean processors that get put into home tech, smart tech, IP tech are going to be 32-bit or even smaller. And so, having a kernel that better supports that may have made sense to a hardware manufacturer at day dot, but the lack of patching is then going to become a problem, which is why you should always keep this sort of tech off of the internet if you can, in my opinion.
Yeah, which is difficult when certainly a lot of consumer stuff that you buy immediately connects to the internet because the servers that it sends everything to are in China.
Yeah.
I've got IP cameras that do exactly that. So there's always a lag. It's interesting. There's a lag between what actually happens and what you see on the app.
Yeah.
And the lag is very close to the latency round time from the UK to China and back.
Yeah, it's incredibly common. I think IP cameras are particularly bad for it. I've got a friend who's a security researcher who regularly goes onto the sort of marketplace applications and buys IP cameras that have got a not known brand name just to see what they do when he plugs them in. He's got sort of an isolated LAN that sits at home for him to do this research on. And sort of 99% of the cameras, the first thing they do when you fire them up, if they're plugged in to the internet, because quite a lot of these will have Ethernet cables at the back rather than Wi-Fi these days, for sort of high res video and stuff. And they will just go, cool, here's a bunch of data about where I am, boom, back over the internet to some server somewhere. And you're right, it's normally China. But yeah, so that's distros. And then the top CVs, so this goes back to our kind of, what things are actually being poked around in the wild. The top one is from 1999, and it's a denial of service vulnerability for ONTAP, which is software-defined storage. And yeah, it's been around for 26 years. It's only a medium CVSS because denial of service is denial of service. It's no one's necessarily stealing data. But kind of hilarious to me that that's the sort of top hitter. And there's clearly some huge parties that are using ONTAP, and presumably version, what's this, 6.5 this affected from 26 years ago, still just sat there on the internet doing storage things.
Amazing. I mean, let's see if I think would you be willing to come back next week and talk about what we found next week? Oh, that'd be great, because maybe we can pick up on that one next week and have a little think about that in the context of vulnerability management and what are some of the things that are worth trying to measure from a vulnerability perspective, because you wouldn't expect these old things. Firstly, you wouldn't expect them to be there, and secondly, you wouldn't expect them to work, but they do. Which we can delve into, I think, next week, because we're out of time for this week. Look, thank you very much indeed, Ross, for that. It's a very interesting insight into the stuff that we're seeing. As always, that's enough from us for today. Hope you have a good weekend. I'll be with you on Monday, and Ross will be joining us again next week.
Cool. Cheers, Stephen. Bye-bye.